Good day. It's a beautiful day here in Budapest in Hungary, and we have just finished the CPAC conference, CPAC Hungary as they call it. CPAC, of course, is the Conservative Political Action Conference. It's the biggest conservative political gathering or conference, at least, in the world. Has always been hosted in the USA, and recently it started spreading out to other parts of the world. This was the third time, I believe, that CPAC was hosted in Budapest as well. You might say CPAC Europe, although they call it CPAC Hungary. And I'm very gladful that they invited me to come back as a speaker. So I will tell you a bit about my meeting with or our meeting with the Prime Minister, and something about the networking and also my conversation on this panel. So I was on the panel on wokeness, I think woke busters they called it. There was a panel discussion about the crisis of wokeness, but also particularly what we ought to do in this battle of ideas, and to give perspectives from different parts of the world. And so I will get the entire clip of our conversation, or if I get it, I will publish it online as well for you guys to see. But what I can say is that my contribution was about our experience in South Africa. I made the point that in many ways we tend to think of South Africa as being behind the rest of the world, when in fact South Africa is in many ways ahead of the rest of the world. And what I mean by that is that South Africa is living with the consequences of some of these policy ideas that the rest of the world is flirting with, the Western world in particular. That countries like America and many countries in Western Europe would like to implement some policy ideas that have already been implemented for some time in South Africa. South Africa is also ahead of the world as far as the demographic issue is concerned, border protection and so forth. And so instead of thinking about South Africa as a country that has to catch up, it's useful to think of South Africa as a country with regard to which the Western world is going to catch up if they don't take the necessary action before it's too late. And so wokeness plays out in different ways. There's the gender debates and so forth, and then there's also the race component. And so in South Africa, I believe, even though the gender issue is much farther down the road in countries like America and Western Europe than in South Africa, issues like critical race theory is especially important. It's especially important to look to South Africa to see where this leads. And so I mentioned some examples of just the lunacy or craziness where the race stuff will get you if sanity is not introduced to the conversation soon enough. One example is the recent ruling by the High Court in South Africa, where Judge Mota said, firstly, he was angry that the legal teams were white, and he asked them to do presentations as to why they are white, why they are not black. The lawyers had to argue this. I made a separate video on this a few weeks ago. He then gave a judgment in the matter and said, and he was angry about the fact, again, in his judgment, that the legal teams were white. And he said that white people don't have proper perspective, and that he would have had a much better perspective if the advocates were black, because they would have given insights that white people are not able to provide. But that's just one example. The other extreme example, well, another extreme example, there are many extreme examples, is the issue of hate speech, the Kill the Boer chant that we so often see and hear in South Africa, which is a glaring example of hate speech. It's a group targeted based on their ethnicity, with regards to which violence is then encouraged from a political platform. Now, if that is not hate speech, then there's nothing left that could be hate speech. But in South Africa, the Human Rights Commission has found that that is not hate speech. Why? Because Julius Malema is black, and because you have to consider the race of the person that is being accused. So to say that this is double standards is by now an understatement. It's much worse than double standards. You might even say it's a form of consistency. In other words, that there's a consistent attempt to target minorities, and especially in the South African context, white people. So you might say it's double standard because the law isn't applied equally. But if you think of this as a consistent and a persistent attack on the white minority in South Africa especially, or the Afrikaners in particular, then you suddenly see that they're actually very, very persistent and consistent in their approach. And so we discussed some of these things, and there's some more that we discussed on the wokeness panel that I won't get into now. Perhaps I'll do a separate video on that. But the wonderful thing about CPAC and also being a speaker is that you get the opportunity to engage with the other speakers. You have access to the speakers lounge, where all the speakers spend time together, and where you can do some networking. So I was able to meet so many people. I'm not even going to try to list them, including the former Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott, including people from all over the world, all continents, people from Argentina, members of the government of Argentina, the US, several European countries, most of the European countries, and other Asia and so forth. It's a long list of people. It was wonderful to use this opportunity to talk about issues with regard to which we can work together and where we can support each other, and also to inform people. And I have noticed that people are becoming more aware of the situation in South Africa. I remember when we started with our international campaigns, as far as I am concerned, in about 2012, that's at least when I became involved with traveling abroad and speaking to people about South Africa, that people didn't know. I remember going to the United Nations in New York and Geneva, to their libraries or bookstores, and about half of the biographies were biographies about Nelson Mandela, and the rest were then divided into all the other people with regard to which you might want to read a biography. And if you spoke about South Africa back then people generally thought South Africa is doing well, because they remember the transition of the 90s and the wonderful constitution that South Africa has. And it was very difficult to explain to people that it's not going as well as they might think. Now the tables have turned, and the ANC has done much to inform the world just of how bad a government they truly are. And so there are a few things that almost everyone I speak with abroad, and remember, I'm not talking about meeting a random person on the street. I'm talking about speaking with politicians, journalists, people from think tank, researchers, and so forth, who are generally a bit better informed about global politics. Almost everyone knows about farm murders. Almost everyone, at least of these people I speak with, almost everyone knows about load shedding, the collapse of infrastructure and service delivery and basic government functions. And then there's also a lot of questions about, and some knowledge about, alternatives that are being put in place, such as the work of the Solidarity Movement, the work that AfriForum is doing, academia, Soltech, Solidarity, of course, the Solidarity Helping Hand. It's actually quite surprising how many people know about these institutions. And then, of course, Urania. I have gotten quite a few people coming up to me asking about Urania, what's happening with Urania, is it growing, and so forth. And it's good to see that we are making progress in terms of informing the world about what's happening here. But also, the highlight, of course, was the meeting we had with the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. So I'm not sure how they compiled the list, but some of the speakers were invited to a private meeting with the Prime Minister at his house in Budapest. It was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity and a wonderful evening. We went to his house where we were given wonderful, wine and snacks and things. And it was an incredible opportunity for Lahazen. And I have to say that the Prime Minister joined us for the conversation. It was very informal. There were no speeches. It was just an hour or a few hours at his house having informal conversations. And I'm actually quite impressed by the extent to which he had gone through the effort to speak with everybody, to walk the room, to meet everyone, shake everyone's hand, and then have a personal conversation with him. And so I was happy also to meet the Prime Minister of Hungary, to have a short private conversation with him about who we are, about South Africa, about the Afrikaner people, about some of our challenges, and also about people who are leaving South Africa, why they are leaving, people who are in Hungary, South Africans or Afrikaners who live in Hungary. And we also had a great conversation about some of our shared history. Remember, we released the book Afrikaners and Hungarians here in Budapest this week, which is about the shared history between Afrikaners and Hungarians. And you would think there's not much that you can say about this topic, but it turns out, as Ilse Nieuwoud has shown in this book, that you can write an entire book about this. And one of the aspects of this book that I discussed with the Prime Minister is the Adopt a Hungarian Family that we had in the, I believe it was the 1960s, after the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, when the Hungarians rose up against communism in Hungary. Remember, it was the time of the Cold War, and there was a harsh clampdown by the Soviet Union against these Hungarians who were fighting against communism, to such an extent that hundreds of thousands of them fled the country as a result of persecution and being killed and so forth. And quite a few actually went to South Africa, where they also received some support. And I think it's important to put a conversation like this in a historical context, to also explain to the Prime Minister that we have done, in as far as what we are able to do, we have done quite a lot. No, thank you. We've done quite a lot to help the Hungarians in as far as we could. There were also some Hungarians, that I mentioned this to the Prime Minister, who came to fight with the Afrikaners during the Anglo-Boer War. Some of them have died in this war, and we are also here to commemorate them. And so we had that conversation, and then there was a broader conversation, more in a group format. So there's much more that could be said about this. I think maybe to conclude, the question is why do we do this, and what do we seek to achieve? Now, we need to remember that there's no silver bullet. There's not just one thing that we can do to fix our problems. International liaison and getting support from abroad is very important, but that's not going to fix our problem. In fact, what I've been saying to people here is, we have the slogan, "A volk redt homself," a nation saves itself, as Father Kestel has said. And we believe this, that if we want a solution for our people in South Africa, we need to find it ourselves. We're not asking someone else to find it for us. But in the process, we believe building friendship, building cooperation, and encouraging mutual recognition and respect is very important. And so one visit like this, one meeting with a Prime Minister, is very important to us, and we are very grateful to have had this opportunity. But we are by no means naive to think that this has simply solved the problem. But this is a wonderful opportunity for us to move forward, to build on the relations that we have developed here, the networks we have built, we have strengthened, and to have some tangible projects sprout from these engagements.